Russia's leader Vladimir Putin has given his first public reaction to comments made by his U.S. counterpart, Donald Trump, following his inauguration earlier this week. Putin praised Trump as a, quote, clever, pragmatic man. Putin echoed Trump's claim that the conflict in Ukraine could have been prevented if, in Putin's words, the election had not been stolen from Trump in 2022. Speaking in a state television interview, Putin also blamed Zelensky for the continuation of the war.
I would like to emphasize that we have already talked to each other in the past, and we are ready for further talks on Ukraine. But there is one important issue to consider here. The current head of state in Kyiv has decreed an explicit ban on negotiations.
So we can speak about all of this with Velina Chakarova. She's an expert in geopolitics with a special focus on Russia. She runs an Austria-based geopolitical consulting company. Welcome to DW. Before we move on, I just want to get the facts straight here. Can you talk us through the reasons why the Ukrainian president has decided to suspend negotiations with Russia?
Yes, it's very obvious why. It has followed actually the illegal announcement of Russia to practically get control over the four regions in Ukraine, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and then Lugansk and Donetsk. And practically this degree was to ensure that there won't be any bilateral negotiations between the Ukrainian President Zelensky and Putin for the time being.
What role could U.S. President Donald Trump play in future negotiations?
So obviously he's going to play the key role. That is for sure. He wants to be a peacemaker. He announced that already during his inauguration speech. He achieved indirectly ceasefire in Gaza, and now he wants this ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia very much. So he's player number one in this game.
And the Russian president has welcomed the Trump presidency. He's called him, quote, not only a clever, but a pragmatic man. Do you think Trump will really be advantageous to Russia?
It's hard to tell because you need to understand that ceasefire is playing into the Russian cards. In fact, Russia has been aiming for ceasefire throughout the almost 3 years of war. And previously, Russia has agreed on 29 ceasefires. You heard it correctly, 29 ceasefires with Ukraine between 2014 and 2022. All of them violated. So ceasefire is obviously a state in this war which will be, positive for the Russian interests to regroup, to prepare again to strike. But at the same time, it's a seizure of hostilities. And Trump can sell that very well domestically. So here, the biggest loser will be Ukraine.
Now, an aide to Zelensky has warned that negotiations should not take place without Ukraine, obviously, and also Europe. Is this what Putin would ultimately want, to exclude Ukraine and Europe from the negotiating table?
Yes, absolutely. The answer is very short. It's definitely the game Russia is playing. You need to imagine what kind of psychological effect this will have on the international arena, having, these two leaders, Trump and Putin, together in direct talks. Then you have also the photo shooting. All of this has a psychological effect on the global affairs. That's the first thing. Second, it sends the clear signal from Russian perspective that Moscow is not internationally isolated and is actually negotiating on par with the Americans. There are some carrots to be offered from geopolitical perspective, and that is, for instance, the announcement by Trump that he would like to get Russia and China back to the negotiation table when it comes to nuclear weapons. So it's more than just Ukraine, of course, when it comes to United States, and unfortunately, it's in this particular situation, it's both for Europe and Ukraine. Pretty precarious situation, I would say.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today. We've been hearing from geopolitical expert Velina Chakarova.
Thank you very much.
The war in Ukraine doesn't depend on oil prices. That is the Kremlin's response today to Donald Trump's suggestion that cutting global oil prices could end the conflict. Well, he made the claim during an address to political and business leaders at the World Economic Forum in Davos on Thursday. And earlier this week, he threatened to impose tariffs and sanctions on Russia if a peace agreement isn't reached, all in the belief that tougher economic measures could be key to a deal. There are growing signs that Russia's war economy is under increasing pressure, squeezed by increased defense spending, high interest rates, and inflation. Media reports suggest Russian President Vladimir Putin is worried about the state of the economy, while some influential business leaders have raised the alarm over bankruptcies. And joining me now from Berlin is Alexandra Prokopenko, a Russian economist and fellow at the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center. Welcome. So until recently, the Russian economy seems to have largely weathered Western sanctions over the war in Ukraine. How much longer do you think it can cope?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, and we need to face the reality that the Kremlin and the economic bloc of the government done a terrific work to sustain under this in this sanctions storm. But we also all need to keep in mind that over the past 2 years, the Russian economy has operated like a marathoner on a fiscal steroids because the impact of fiscal injections from the budget into economy were huge, approximately 10% of GDP in 22 and 23. So now we see that those steroids are wearing off. We see that Russian manufacturing growth is slowing, and there is so in terms of manufacturing, we still see growth in military industry complex, but in other sectors don't. We see high inflation, double-digit interest rates. So the problems are mammothing, but we also need to face the reality that that with current equilibrium, 2025, Russia's economy will pass more or less okayish.
So when Donald Trump says Russia is heading toward big problems with its economy, is he right to say that?
Russia's economy had a great headwinds now, but it is a lot of problem. But let's frame it this way. Will this problem force Putin to change his goals towards Ukraine? Unfortunately not.
Well, that is also what the Kremlin says. There are reports, however, that President Putin is growing increasingly concerned himself about Russia's economy. What evidence is there for that?
I also read this article, and I think, well, every president is concerned about the economy. Of course, Putin knows and sees the inflation, and he admits that inflation is a problem. Of course, double-digit key rate, limited investments, and lots of Putin cronies and rich people surrounding him, saying that he need to force head of a central bank to reduce the key rate because they want to have more comfortable loans and continue operate not and continue get their high margins. So of course he is concerned, but I still barely think that that his concern is far from being so big that it's persuade him to stop the war. I mean, Putin a couple of times said that for Russia, war with Ukraine is existential. And we see that he can sacrifice a lot. He already sacrificed financial and macroeconomic stability. Well, you see the inflation. He already sacrificed this because of the war. And I don't think that, with the current equilibrium, he will change his mind because of inflation or any kind of other economic problem. He's not in the trade-off when he needs to choose between pensions and war economy. He still can pay for both.
And what about the fact that the U.S. president has threatened more tariffs and sanctions if a peace deal isn't done? I mean, how impactful could those be?
I'm pretty doubtful about tariffs since the bilateral trade between Russia and U.S. I'm not sure it exceeded $3 billion last year. So it's almost zero. And if you are imposing tariffs on almost zero, the result would be, well, it's pretty easy to say what result would be. I can understand the logic behind Trump's threat to reduce oil price, but it's also a very tricky stuff. It requires a lot of negotiations, not only with Saudis but also with buyers of Russian hydrocarbons. So it's not so easy. It's easy to say, but it's very complicated to implement. And of course, lower oil prices are pretty harmful for U.S. Oil producers. So I think it's not so easy to implement.
Alexandra, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. That is Alexandra Prokopenko, a Russian economist and fellow at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center.